I'm Nick Knudsen, joined by Will Miles. Welcome to Stand Up and Holler on tonight's episode for 2 bits, a late edition along the defensive line. 4 bits as the opening date for the football facility approaches. We'll discuss its potential impact. 6 bits, we'll go over a great article from Nick Torre of On3 discussing Napier's focus on discipline. And we'll wrap up with red flags from Matt Hayes at SDS. Matt Hayes didn't hold back on our Gators, Will. That's going to be a fun one to discuss at the end. How's it going, man, before we dive in here to 2 bits?
It's going all right, man. Getting excited to head down there in a couple of weeks. My son's going down with me. It's going to be fun. Hopefully people who are down there and see us will come up and say hi. That's always fun and flattering. So don't be shy. If you see Nick or I there at the game, feel free to come up, say hello, let us know where you watch us, where you listen, where you read, and how long you've been reading, because we always love seeing everybody who's out there. So hopefully we'll get noticed. I don't want to presume that I'll get noticed, but last year I did the Alabama game. It was kind of cool, I gotta admit.
It's good getting to Will's head here. It's get the little ego boost there, Will, huh?
Well, I'm an artist, which means I've got like zero self-confidence. So anytime somebody comes up to me, it helps.
That's good. Let's jump into 2 bits here. And we'll talk about Chris Thomas being back on the roster along the defensive line. It was revealed that defensive lineman Chris Thomas Jr. is back on the roster after initially being a part of a group of players who were removed from the roster after spring ball. Billy Napier did not elaborate as to why Thomas was removed from the roster, other than to say just some internal things there from a logistical standpoint relative to his role on the team and his eligibility and ability to participate with the team. Some of those things have been cleared up. Those things took time. Obviously, we'll keep the details in-house there, but we're happy Chris is back with us and certainly continue his development and his growth. Look, hey, Will, Thomas, he might not be a primetime addition to the roster here. Very little experience in 2021, played against UCF in the bowl game. That's really the only time he saw it, I believe, last year. But in my mind, any addition along this thin defensive line is welcome, especially when that addition stands at 6'5", 314 pounds and plays defensive tackle. We didn't have much luck in the transfer portal. Didn't go our way. We're going to be relying heavily on a freshman, most likely. Defensive line, we've harped on it all off season, definitely a point of concern. So can't hurt getting this guy back in the rotation, Will.
Yeah, I mean, it says something about their depth, I'm sure, when it comes to bringing him back. I think, you look at when you got guys who are ranked 100th to 300th, you expect 1 to 1.5 of 5 who you sign end up being NFL quality guys. And so you need 2 defensive tackles who are NFL quality guys to play effective defense in the SEC. Florida doesn't currently have a defensive line commit in the 2023 class who's over 255 pounds. I'm sure that'll change, but still pretty light at that position. They only signed 2 defensive tackle commits in the 2020 cycle. So Jamari Lyons and Chris McClellan, and then 2 in 21, Desmond Watson, and then Christopher Thomas was the other one. So, one of the reasons having him back is just from a depth perspective, you need a guy there who potentially can turn into an NFL quality guy. Like, he was 447th ranked overall, 3-star, but 88.17. So not a bad recruit at all. Certainly guys who turn into NFL prospects start off at that point on a regular basis. That doesn't mean he's going to, but it's a lottery ticket, right? And so if you have the roster spot and you certainly have the need, then it makes sense that he'd be back there. Now, it's a little bit needed, but also a little bit unsettling, right? Because you're getting it from a guy who was asked to leave the program. Something changed along the way. Hopefully it's a good thing that things changed along the way. And hopefully Chris Thomas can be someone who contributes. I think it's worrisome that we're bringing in a guy like that who we thought was off the roster. And it was kind of surprising when he was asked to leave earlier this year. I mean, that was the one that you looked at out of all the guys who were cut, quote unquote, that you looked at and said, whoa, defensive lineman, especially defensive tackle. How are they getting rid of somebody there? So, maybe they set some things in place and he met the needs and met the demands that Napier had, and they've let him back in. But I suspect that a lot of letting him back in is that they've seen what's happening on the defensive line up front in practice and realize that it doesn't work to have a tackling dummy there. Like, they need to have a body there in the SEC. That's going to be necessary.
Doesn't hurt being 6'5", 314 at any point when the needs of this roster very much fit what you're bringing to the table. However, I will spin it positively. if Napier's letting him back on the roster. I mean, we're not seeing this from the other guys at the other positions, so it's not going on across the board. Clearly, if there are some things that Napier laid out and he met his obligations and he got it together, credit to Thomas for getting it together and earning a second opportunity here, even though it didn't look good a couple months ago.
Well, absolutely. I mean, he's going to get a chance, right? I mean, the reality is he's in the rotation, like just by virtue of being there, he's now in the rotation. And so he's going to get a chance. So if Thomas was upset about playing time or was upset about where he was in the depth chart or whatever, I think all those things are going to be resolved because he's going to get an opportunity to rotate in on the defensive line this year. Now, is he going to play, 60 snaps against Utah? Unlikely. But is he going to play 10, 15, 20? And does that spell a guy like Gervon Dexter enough to where in the fourth quarter now Dexter can make a big play? Or Dexter, we've talked a little bit about him sliding out to sort of defensive end. I mean, it depends on who you talk to, but Dexter being less of a nose tackle who's going to be a run stopper up front and putting him at the defensive end. I mean, I think we all presume that Desmond Watson would then be sliding inside and providing that run stopping, but Watson can't play every play. If you do, he's just going to be gassed by the time you get to the fourth quarter. And so having a guy like Thomas to come in and spell him, just like, a few years ago, we all got confused when Florida would bring in 4 new wide receivers, even though they had Kyle Pitts and Kadarius Toney. But then by the time you got to the fourth quarter, those guys were ready to go. And so, the reality is in the SEC, you're gonna have to rotate people in. Thomas is gonna get a lot of time. He's gonna get an opportunity to show whether he's any good. And now it's up to him to take advantage of the opportunity.
Yeah, no, we're going to talk about it on this episode too, but a lot of talk about harping on discipline from Billy Napier. Being a disciplinarian doesn't mean just, kicking people off left and right. It also means giving people a chance to earn their way back. I do believe that's a part of it. So I think that if he set some ground rules up for the kid and the kid met his obligations, he's getting a second shot. Good on him. And then also good on him for being 6'5" and 314. So we'll also stick with that. Will, you got anything else to say on this topic?
I'm just glad we got another defensive tackle because out of all the places that I'm worried about, that is like number one.
We need it. All right, let's move on to 4 bits. We'll talk about the facility opening up very shortly. I took a look online to see the online live view of it. It looks like there's a lot of work to be done still, but the James Bill Hevner Football Training Center is scheduled to open on August 14th. So right around the corner. We've been hearing about this facility for a couple of years here. $85 million broke ground in June of 2020. That's at the site of the old baseball stadium next to the O'Connell Center. It's going to feature athletes-only dining. We're going to post some images here, video rolling while I'm talking here, Will. New coach's office, team locker room and meeting areas, weight room, enhanced sports medicine and rehabilitation facility with hydrotherapy, a resort-style pool area, along with amenities such as a barber shop on the premises. Will, this place looks absolutely unbelievable. It's going to be great for the football program. Solid recruiting tool, definitely a piece that's been lacking, that's been cited for a very long time. It's also the front lower quadrant of the building will be for all student athletes, featuring that's where the all dining is going to be for the athletes. And there's going to be an area for outdoor activities and amenities as well. So I think that this is definitely a exciting sales point for Napier and his staff. It's one thing to talk about it. It's one thing, y'all see the pictures and the video going right now, but it's another thing to actually put your eyes on it and actually walk through it and actually see it. And I think that's going to add another level to what Billy Napier could sell when it comes to the University of Florida.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's important that you have facilities that match your competitors in any area, right? I mean, you and I go into our normal jobs. If we walk into the facility, if we're deciding to change jobs and we walk into a facility of a place that we're potentially considering and it's a dump, we go, well, if they treat the location like this, what does that mean about how they treat their employees and that sort of stuff? And maybe it's right, maybe it's wrong, but that's the reality, right? And so having a place that looks nice, having a place that is a place where you want to go, so you don't have to look for off-campus housing, so you don't have to search all over the place for food, all that sort of stuff is important, but it's just a level set. right? I mean, they've been doing this at Alabama for years. Clemson famously has like a slide in their football facility, so and the arms race isn't going to stop. So just because you built this doesn't mean that there's not more that needs to come and more that needs to be done. Now, hopefully some of the booster dollars that have been used to build this building can now be diverted towards talent acquisition and maybe some NIL applications. But look, it's a great thing. It's awesome that the university has it. Clearly they built the indoor practice facility a few years ago. Now you've got this heaven earth facility that's going to not only make the football players more comfortable, but make all the athletes more comfortable, help take care of those guys. And certainly those guys are bringing in the revenue. And so, it makes sense that you would pour that revenue back into them. And I think that maybe more than anything is the reflection, right? When you come in and you see a dump, you go, oh, these guys are making money and putting it in their pocket. As opposed to when you come in and you see the facility, it's like, okay, they're at least reinvesting the money made by the guys who came 4 years before me into my experience. And so, I think that makes you feel good, makes you feel like you're valued by the university and is a selling tool. It's not the only one, but it is a selling tool. And now Florida's on level ground with its main competitors.
Yeah, the one thing I noticed, if anyone's ever seen the inside of where the current facility now inside of the swamp, I mean, the swamp's an old building, but they redid a lot of that over the last 20, 30 years here. And that is something where when you go into it, the facility inside, it's not that it's not dumpy or anything. It's pretty nice under there. They have a nice weight room and everything, but there's no windows, man. You're underground. You're like in a cave basically down there. I can't help but notice just how wide open this facility is. Napier's got that nice little office on the side that overlooks the fields and everything. A lot of sunlight, big building. It's going to be a lot different presentation for people walking through there than it is currently.
Yeah, I mean, as well as I do that when you're in Florida, you want to see outside. Right now, you might not want to be outside because it might be so oppressively hot that you don't want to go anywhere out there. But certainly looking out there and seeing people walk by and, seeing, being able to see the trees sway and being able to see the sun and all that sort of stuff is enjoyable, whether you're doing research in a lab or whether you're a football player lifting weights. And so putting them in a situation where that's a more enjoyable activity is certainly a positive. I mean, that's the thing, right? I don't know if the facilities make or break, say 7, 8, 9 recruits. I think there's a couple who probably go, okay, this is equivalent to Clemson or equivalent to Alabama. And so I'm not going to cross Florida off my list. And with everything we've heard about Napier, it's that he's into building relationships. And so one of the problems that you run into is if you walk into a place and it's a dump, you don't get an opportunity to build relationships because the person's already crossed you off the list. So in this case, to eliminate reasons for people to cross you off the list is an important first part to being able to build those relationships. And then, you go down a whole other list of different recruits and different recruits' priorities, and they're going to have to take care of all of those. But you have now eliminated one of the reasons why somebody might say no. And so that's important, right? Because it's not going to be every recruit who's going to come in and go, ooh, brand new facilities. I love this place. But there's going to be some, and more than anything, there are some who would have said these facilities are substandard. I'm looking someplace else, and you've eliminated that concern.
There's little things too, where right now they get dressed in the locker room and they have to walk across the street to go to the practice facility right now, whereas like they're going to be able to just get dressed, walk right onto the field. And Napier's even talked about the amount of time you have to spend moving, different things, getting over there during the day. Napier probably has it calculated down to the second, but just little things like that. It's going to make it a little easier, a little more efficient, little nicer facility, up to date, modern. They're probably going to have some modern features in there that they don't have in the current setup. It's going to be awesome to see. And it's finally here, Will. So we're just about a week away from that facility opening.
Yeah, it's exciting. It's good to get that going. Now we don't have any excuses, right? We got the facilities, we've got the booster support, we've got the head coach who knows he's supposed to acquire talent, and it's time to go to get it done.
All right, let's move on to 6 bits here. We'll talk about Nick Delatorre's article from On3 Sports. Will, do that. I believe we were just talking about before we got on On3. Little plug for Delatorre and those guys. $10 sale this week to get on. Yeah. Get on the site there, $10 sale, I believe, for the year. Good stuff. They do great coverage over there. Article on Napier focusing on the discipline of the team. And I'm going to quote the article here from De La Torre. For anyone that watched the 2021 Florida Gators, the first thing that jumps out are penalties. The Gators were penalized 104 times, second worst in the SEC, 119th in the country. Prior to the start of fall camp, Napier reminded the team that what they did to themselves last season. He was just showing us that it wasn't big penalties that hurt us. It was all the undisciplined penalties, offsides, holding, things like that we can learn not to do. Tight end Dante Zander said he handed out a piece of paper and it had all the highlights of all the penalties we had lost yardage on, and which ones were undisciplined and which ones were holding offside, stuff like that. So Gators Online here, De La Torre goes through each of the box scores from the 2021 season to look at all 104 Florida penalties, which is a painful assignment there. Good on him for doing that. He broke down the undisciplined penalties by game, counted all the false starts, offsides, procedural penalties, as well as the unsportsmanlike penalties. Hey, Will, there were 75 undisciplined penalties, including an incomprehensible 29 false starts in 13 games. I'm not reading them all off here for you, but some that stood out to me: 8 false starts against Kentucky. We all know about that one, right? That kind of cost us the game right there. 4 holdings against Vanderbilt. That was a nice game. You look at that going like, that was one of the good games last year. I had 4 holding penalties in that game. That's a lot for one game. 2 holding against Georgia, 4 false starts against Samford, 4 offsides, 2 holdings, 3 false starts. Missouri, 2 false starts, 2 offsides, 2 holdings. FSU, 3 false starts, 3 unsportsmanlike conducts, 4 offsides, and a holding penalty. We'll wrap it up with UCF here, 3 false starts. So these are just the dumb penalties that can easily be cut out of the game. Although I'll say this, Will, if there's not at least 3 unsportsmanlike conduct penalties after not playing FSU for a year, I mean, there's got to be some juice there, right? We were fighting for a bowl bid that day. I want to see some unsportsmanlike penalties against Florida State once in a while.
It's funny. You said there were 74? They only had 104 total penalties at the bottom.
75 undisciplined penalties.
That's 75 out of 104. So they're 73% undisciplined penalties, which is pretty ridiculous. Obviously, the 8 false starts against Kentucky are the things that really stand out at you. But this is a symptom of a disease, right? And you think about the Alabama game. They're like, oh, okay, the undisciplined one. There's a holding, a substitution infraction, and the false start. But there's also whatever that 2-point conversion was at the end. There's also, the kickoff return where the guy caught it in the end zone, or where he flubbed it in the end zone and watched it go out of bounds the half-yard line. So they had to go 99 yards instead of 80 or 75. And all of a sudden at the end of the game, you don't have any time left. And even if you go to the previous year, right, where you got the shoe toss against LSU, you've got the poor use of timeouts by Mullen against Alabama. You've got the complete no-show against Oklahoma. So from a disciplinary standpoint, it's been more than a year, right? So that where Florida has struggled. And even the LSU game, there's no penalties, but there were a lot of bad plays in that game, particularly on the defensive side of the ball, staying in your gaps against counter runs. But even, Emory Jones comes out, throws a pick 6 to start the second half, which is what started the Anthony Richardson comeback. Richardson threw an awful interception in the first half of that game. So, the penalties are a part of the discipline, but all that does is sort of go, yeah, you're a bad team if 73% of your penalties are undisciplined penalties. At the same time, it wasn't like there aren't other things that Napier can pull out of each of these games from a disciplinary standpoint and say we need to be better. Because you look at the Kentucky game, just field goal blocking. It might have been pretty important there. That's attention to detail, right? Having your special teams ready, being able to make a field goal, and when a field goal gets blocked, being able to get somebody on the ground. So it was a tough year. It was a tough year from a disciplinary standpoint. Certainly, it's a good look by De La Torre looking at all the penalties. But even if all they do is fix the penalties, that's not going to fix everything, because there were discipline issues that abounded, and Yeah, I mean, get your unsportsmanlike in against Florida State because we're okay with that, but not against Kentucky when your late hit out of bounds pushes the field goal back that eventually gets blocked and returned to defeat you.
Get them out of the way like in the first quarter too. You get 3. Napier should like budget a few of those for Florida State game.
Well, and to be fair, one of those was Pierce, right? One of those was Pierce running into the end zone after his helmet got ripped off, because your instinct is to continue going, but the NCAA rule is it's unsportsmanlike if you don't just drop to the ground like a turtle when your helmet gets pulled off. So
he knows that highlights live forever. That was no regrets on that one. That was a lack of discipline. That was just a monster being a monster.
The good news is he got like 7 carries a year last year, so had to make the most of it.
We had 7 games with 8 or more penalties. 7 games with 8 or more penalties. But I think the most shocking of all here from Del Torre's article, 0 penalties against LSU. We were so bad in so many ways on that defense against LSU and the offense was so good that it completely slipped my mind that we had 0 penalties in that game. So that one stood out to me, Will.
Yeah, it's funny. Florida has been at the bottom half of the nation, and probably I would say even the bottom quarter of the nation in terms of penalties against ever since I can remember. Like Florida has always been a very highly penalized team. That's okay as long as it's aggression that's causing the penalties, not lack of discipline, right? I mean, so you're gonna jump off sides from time to time because you're trying to get a start. You're trying to get to where you need to go faster. You're trying to beat the defensive or the offensive tackle, whatever it might be, right? But what you can't do is jump off sides and then let the guy run for 75 yards because you weren't in your gap either. And that was sort of the thing that last year I think really showed up. So I'm not really looking at like penalties per game or those sorts of things. I mean, obviously the 8 false starts need to go away. You can't have that sort of stuff in any game and expect to win. But it's just like anything, right? I mean, you turn the ball over 4 or 5 times, it's really hard to win. A lot of times those turnovers are discipline things. And so it's more when we talk about discipline, again, I know that these penalties tell a story for last year, but I don't think you're gonna be able to look at penalties this year and say it tells the story just based on number. I think what you're going to have to do is say, were they aggression penalties or were they tentative penalties? And by the time you got 4 or 5, 6 false starts in against Kentucky, it was clear that the offensive line was afraid of jumping. And so they were jumping because they weren't coordinated and because they weren't necessarily locked in. And that just can't happen. And so the hope is under Napier, we'll see that that's not going to happen at all.
Well, hopefully they don't stick with the clap cadence that they seem to not understand. That would also be a good thing to hope for. All right. Good article there from Nick Delatorre on 3 Gators Online there. Check them out. Great website. Great Gator content. Sorry, tongue twister there. And also Stadium Gale podcast. Good stuff from Nick. All right, let's move on to a $1 red flags article here from Matt Hayes at Saturday Down South. So, sticking with the flags theme though, Will. So we'll just go from one set of flags to another here. So his article was titled Red Flags. Oh, these Gators have a ton of them. And he really did not hesitate to go in. First stretch here. Florida's best running back. He's laying out his concerns right off the bat. Florida's best running back is a transfer portal signee from Louisiana. Florida's best offensive lineman is a transfer portal signee from Louisiana. Florida's best wide receiver is a transfer portal signee from Arizona State. Stop me when you think this is a healthy SEC program. I thought that was a great line there from him. But, hey, look, the concern is valid. We'll go into more of these red flags. I'll let you jump in here, though, real quick, Will, with Matt Hayes' opening.
I think it's up for debate whether Lingard's better than Johnson. I think it's up for debate whether White or Garage is better than Torrance, though I think Torrance is a good player. I think it's up for debate whether Shorter's a better player than Pearsall. I think the fact that we don't have a definitive answer is absolutely one of the reasons why Dan Mullen's not around. The idea that so I get it. Like the over-under for Florida this year is 6.5. There are a lot of people who think they're going to be pretty bad this year. I don't happen to be one of them, but I think the tone of the article is that Dan Mullen's not around because of his recruiting, and the bottom fell out because of that recruiting. That's not really why Dan Mullen's gone. Dan Mullen's gone because his recruiting wasn't good enough to compete with the big boys. And then when you're not beating Kentucky and Vanderbilt, and well, they beat Vanderbilt, but when you're not beating Kentucky and Tennessee, and well, they beat Tennessee, but if you're not beating Kentucky and Missouri on a regular basis, then hey, people are going to get upset. And that's the reality. And so the losses that cost him his job have nothing to do with teams that are more talented than his. The games that cost him his job were games where either his offense didn't show up, or Todd Grantham's defense didn't show up, or players didn't know where they were supposed to be, or there was a complete lack of discipline for a team that was more talented. I mean, even that game against UCF last year, or Central, whatever we're calling them these days, even the game against Central last year, there were guys roaming deep in the secondary wide open and just couldn't hit them. And that game was close almost the entire game until Central started to pull away there in the fourth quarter. But the reason they had an opportunity to pull away is Florida didn't hit any of their 5, 6, 7 shots they had deep in the field. Against Kentucky, Florida couldn't pull away because Jones just refused to throw the ball deep, and got to a point where Mullen had to sort of defend him in a way that was a little bit untoward at the press conference afterwards. So I get it. I mean, I understand what he's saying. I know he's driving a point home. Certainly it drives clicks, and I'm sure drives the Gator hive over towards Hayes, but I don't buy the premise that this roster is this flawed thing. I don't think they're Alabama. I don't think they're Georgia. I think they may struggle against Tennessee, but damn it, they should beat Kentucky and South Carolina. Like, they're not Vanderbilt. This is a team that has real talent, and the idea that they don't is false.
I can let's do this exercise. Alabama's best running back is a transfer portal signing from Georgia Tech. Alabama's best offensive lineman is a transfer portal signee from Vanderbilt. Alabama's best wide receiver is a transfer portal signee from Louisville. Kind of works. You can kind of pull that off for Alabama, but obviously not comparing the rosters between Alabama and Florida. But I actually like that opening there from Hayes. I got a little kick out of that because I think he's pointing out some valid concerns here. Look, there's a lot of depth issues on this roster. It's like you said, maybe Johnson's not the best wide receiver on the, maybe, he's obviously trying to make a point on that, whether or not you agree with it, but he had a source within the program saying the first level of players, the starters on offensive defense, can win games. After that, there are guys who shouldn't even be on this roster. Some of the red flags that Hayes continued to point out: the season will collapse if anything happens to one player, Anthony Richardson. No impact players in the front seven, no one on the edge who can consistently disrupt a passing game, and no one in the middle who can consistently blow up the run games. How about taking a job with elite expectations, he wrote, and replacing 34 players from the previous season who either left for the NFL, graduated, or left the team for any other reason. He also mentioned the new offense and new defense installs, and he says, you want to know why Florida fans are panicking this offseason? It's not so much recruiting. Napier is working on a top 10 class for 2023. It's the reality that's quickly coming into focus that this is a heavy lift. And I think in terms of it being a heavy lift, I think that's exactly why I do think he has some credence in a lot of the points he's making in this article. He's simplifying things a little bit, but I do think the heavy lift aspect, I think that's why you looked at it, Mullen. You talked about why Mullen was dismissed, and it's just not at the elite level it needs to be. And it wasn't, you weren't approaching it. There wasn't that fresh class coming in. There wasn't, like you guys, we talked about it all offseason. There wasn't that reason for hope going forward, and he needed a fresh start. And I do think that Napier, if you look at it in terms of catching Alabama, Georgia, yeah, we got a heavy lift in front of us in terms of Alabama, Georgia. But in terms of getting back into, being that program in the East who's going to be the main contender up against Georgia every single year, I don't think it's that heavy. I think we'll be right back in there, either this year or next.
I'll say what I said when Mullen was let go, which is that it's entertaining to find all these people who find recruiting religion after the previous coach is gone, and then talk about how the roster isn't good enough to compete with the likes of Georgia and Alabama. Like, that's something that people like me, like Dave, like you have been saying. Well, not you. You were rooting for Mullen the entire time. But
yeah,
I've converted you at this point, I think. But
you've converted me a little bit. We used to argue about that a little more, but I've seen enough of the data at this point where I'm more sold on it.
So here's the point, right? Is that Matt Hayes is finding his recruiting religion now that he's done, or now that Mullen is gone. But the reality is, anybody who looked at the recruiting classes and it particularly saw the attrition from that 2019 bump class, where half the guys on that team never really made a contribution, or from that class never really made a contribution, you can go back and look and say that's where that fell apart. So if you're a Florida fan and if you're looking at a place where is Napier going to succeed or is he not, this is the recruiting class. This 2023 recruiting class that comes in is going to be the thing. If the whole program falls apart in year 3 or 4 under Napier, it's going to be because this 2023 class wasn't able to deliver and we got a ton of attrition and we weren't able to hit on some lower level guys and that there weren't enough elite guys and all that sort of stuff. So I think it's a little bit disingenuous to say the roster's not good enough. Well, no crap. We've known that. That's why Dan Mullen's gone. Like, the reason that he's gone has nothing to do with X's and O's, has a lot to do with attitude, but also has to do with the fact that Florida just was not recruiting at that level and didn't for 4 straight years. So now you look at Napier, and Napier has improved the recruiting. It's not perfect, but he's improved the recruiting. But the other thing he points to is like 2 guys who are on the first and second preseason All SEC teams. I'm sitting there going, well, of course no Florida players on the All SEC teams. They played like crap last year. Right? Like, what are you going to go put Justin Shorter on that team? No, but now he's got a much better quarterback throwing to him. Right? So if Anthony Richardson goes out and has, let's say Richardson ends up being like the 4th best quarterback in the SEC, which I think if he stays healthy is probably like his floor. I mean, he's certainly going to be better than Will Rogers, but irrespective of where Richardson ends up, let's say he's 4th. Well, that means Justin Shorter has had a really, really good year. He's going to get drafted in the NFL. And Pearsall's probably had a good year too. And then everybody's going to go, oh, well, what a job by Napier. It's like, no, he had really good. I mean, yes, it's a good job by Napier, but he had really good players. And that first wave of players is really good. And the idea that the second wave of players isn't like SEC quality, no, that's not true either. Now, can you sustain injuries to like 8 or 9 or 10 guys and then claim you're more talented than Kentucky or Tennessee or South Carolina? No. But I mean, look, if Will Levis goes down, Kentucky's going to fall apart. Kentucky may fall apart even with Levis in charge.
That's what I was going to say.
If Will Rogers goes down, Mississippi State's going to fall apart.
How many teams can sustain losing a starting quarterback? That's the one argument I'm getting tired of with Anthony Richardson. Like, yeah, obviously it would be a huge blow to lose Anthony Richardson, but what percentage of teams in America are is USC awesome if they lose Caleb Williams this year? Like, what teams in America can lose their starting quarterback and be just as good?
I mean, the only team I can remember who changed their starting quarterbacks and won big in recent history is Clemson, when they had Trevor Lawrence coming in, but Kelly Bryant was just keeping his seat warm, right? I mean, it wasn't a question of is Lawrence more talented. It was, how do we do this without losing the team? Because Bryant led us to the playoff last year, even though we laid an egg then against Alabama in the Final Four. You don't see changes at quarterbacks. I guess maybe Book for Notre Dame came in a few years ago.
Cardale Jones, 3rd string quarterback, Ohio State playoff round 2014.
Yeah, Alabama should have won that game. I don't know how
3rd string quarterback. They had the opportunity with 3rd string quarterback, but
absolutely. So again, I mean, I think maybe Georgia, like if Stetson Bennett went down, do you think that they would be? I don't. Again though, I think I've actually been looking at Bennett over the last couple of weeks, and I think his performance last year is better than maybe we give him credit for. Again,
he's no Will Rogers, but
he's way better than Will Rogers. So.
He's no Will Rogers, I'll say that.
I mean, look, Alabama's the only one, right? Alabama's the only one where you said if they lose their starting quarterback, they're still in the playoffs. Everyone else, there would be a giant question mark. And so this idea that, well, Anthony Richardson's injury prone. Well, 1, he had his knee scoped and his knee's been fixed. Mm-hmm. 2, in the LSU game, he came back even after he was injured. The other injury he had was a hamstring injury on a run. So, that's kind of a freak injury when you blow it, when you blow up an 80-yard run and then pull up lame on the back end. The other thing is that he was out there practicing on the field before the Alabama game. I think if he was the starter and if he was a Heisman level candidate and there wasn't anybody behind him, I think he would have played against the Tide. So it's one of those things where he had Emory Jones. He was healthy. Dan Mullen didn't want to play Anthony Richardson anyway, but this idea that he missed a ton of time because of the hamstring, I think is actually misguided. I think if Richardson was the starter last year, he would have played in all but maybe 1 or 2 games. And this idea that he's like made out of glass any more than any other quarterback, I think is probably not exactly not exactly based in reality. Hey, we'll see, right? I mean, but if he gets injured, you got Jack Miller. That was the whole point of bringing in Miller.
Yeah.
Not that Miller's going to be the star, but that Miller's going to sort of be able to keep you afloat. And we'll see. I mean, I think the only place where where Hayes really can talk about this is the defensive line, and that's because the recruiting there's been horrible.
But to say we have no impact players coming off the edge who can consistently disrupt the passing game, is he forgetting about Cox, or are you just not putting Cox in that category? Look, I think Cox has developed well. His first year on the field a couple of years ago, I thought he over pursued a lot. I thought he was out of position a lot. And last year, he seemed to clean a lot of that up. He had a heck of a game against Alabama. I remember he almost had that interception where he dropped back into coverage, but he had some real good moments last year, and he seems to be a guy that's steadily improving. I'm not sure he's at the point where he should be quote tweeting the Georgia football account to watch out for him this year. I'm not sure. Maybe play that one quietly. Brenton, maybe play that one a little more quiet next time. But yeah, I like the confidence. The guy's definitely not short on confidence, but he's a guy that's in that all SEC mix in the preseason. So to say we have nobody out there, there's not a ton of depth there, Will. We also got some guys that are unproven there that Matt Hayes might not know a lot about right now. I don't totally buy into that. I do buy in more up the middle that consistently blows up the run. We're going to struggle a little more up the middle than I hope we will. But maybe Watson, Thomas, those guys kind of step up, and that could be more of a force. But definitely concerned. We talked about it earlier in the episode.
Well, so it's funny. Did you see Saban's comments this week about last year being a rebuilding year for Alabama?
Oh,
do you know why he said that? The reason he said that is all of his best players were from the 2020 recruiting class, and last year was a reflection of the 19 recruiting class. So the fact that he had all those guys leave for the NFL when they won the national championship the year before, and that the 19 recruiting class really did not either had already left or did not step up in a way that the 20 recruiting class basically took over at Alabama. And that's one of the reasons why they were so good last year, but it's also one of the reasons why they were green and inconsistent at certain times. The reason Florida fell apart last year is because the 19 recruiting class provided almost nothing to the organization. And so if you look at the 20 recruiting class, the 2020 recruiting class is the one that's going to lead this year. Gervon Dexter was the number one guy in that class for Florida. He was 12th overall. Derek Wingo was the number 2 guy. Xavier Henderson was the number 3 guy. Jaquavian Fraziers was number 5. Antoine Powell was number 9. Richardson was number 10. Human Meelan, Braun, Kamara Wilcoxon, Rashard Torrance, Avery Helm, Lamar Goods, Jalen Lee, Finley Graham, Trevez Johnson, Gerald Mincy, Jonathan Odom, Richard Leonard, and Jeremy Crawshaw. There are a lot of guys I just listed on there who have played starters minutes already. You think about Johnson, you think about Trevon Johnson, Richie Leonard is a backup offensive lineman. You've got, Helm, who's now starting corner, Rashard Torrance, who's starting safety, Braun starting offensive lineman, Human Meelan, who's going to have to come in as a defensive end and play major minutes, Richardson starting quarterback, Antoine Powell, sort of him and Human Meelan are going to be fighting for that. Fraziers is somebody we need to step up at wide receiver. Henderson, somebody who's shown some potential, but needs to take the next step forward. Wingo is going to be starting middle linebacker, and Dexter is going to be starting defensive tackle. So assuming these guys stay healthy, this 2020 class is not the same as the 2019. The 2019 was decimated from attrition, from lack of success on the field, from guys in this 2020 class stepping forward. And if you think about Florida last year, it really was, they were the same thing as Alabama, right? That 2020 class stepped forward and took a bunch of starting minutes away from the 2019 class. The problem is the 2019 class and the 2018 one and the 2017 one weren't all that great. And so, it wasn't like the Tide where they're making the playoff and making it to the national championship and almost winning with guys who are a little bit inconsistent. It's when you got inconsistencies from these guys, you wound up losing games, and they lost all those one-score games last year. I think that turns around with the 2020 class. Now, again, the interesting thing then will be, okay, who in the 2021 class starts to get some time, right? You got Marshall, who got time last year, but then you got Scooby Williams, Tyreek Sapp, Corey Collier, Carlos Del Rio Wilson's already gone. You got Marcus Burke, Donovan McMillan, Mugar Arbil at linebacker or at offensive line. You got Dejon Reynolds at wide receiver, DeJuan Back at linebacker, Chief Borders, Gage Wilcox already gone. Then you got Justice Boone and Desmond Watson and Nick Elksness. So those guys are going to tell us something about the future of the program, But if Desmond Watson and Nick Elksnis are the best players on the team, we're screwed because the players who have to step up have to be from that 2020 class. And so, yeah, those guys were inexperienced and were not necessarily all SEC players last year. I think there's an opportunity, one or two of those guys is going to be able to step into that role. I don't buy that Florida doesn't have any talent. What I buy is that the 2019 class was a disaster for Dan Mullen, and that's why he's gone. So, now the 19 class was bad. The 20 class, I think, has been better already. I think if you look at the 20 class, it's already better. And it's one of the reasons why I sort of preached patience last year with Mullen until things really started falling apart, because you could see there was a disconnect between Florida's points for and points against and Florida's overall record. I think that's going to start to come back into alignment. But yeah, God, you look at that 2019 class, Chris Steele. Oh, was he a contributor? Then you got Elam, who ends up a first-round draft pick. Then you got Bogle, Tyron Hopper, Keon Zipper, Diabate, Lloyd Summerall, Naquan Wright, Jalen Humphreys, Tarquin, Jalen Jones, Jadon Hill, who's been injured, William Herod, Chester Kimbrough, Deontay Marks, Riley Simons, Jamarcus Weston, Kingsley Egwekin, Josiah Pierre, Trent Whittemore, and Ethan White. I mean, I would venture to say Egwekin, White, and Whittemore are the three best guys from that class other than Kyrie Elam. And that's rough. Like, right. You needed to get contributions from Bogle, Hopper, Zipper, and Diabate, and it couldn't just be, I'm going to get you 10 catches at tight end. I mean, you need to be getting 35, 40 catches from a guy who's 3 years out by the time you get to that point.
So maybe flipping over the roster with 34 players, replacing 34 players from the previous season, not such a horrible thing. Definitely creates, I mean, there's a lot in football that is about continuity when you're talking about installing new schemes, new offense, new defense, and then so many new players within the program. Hey, I mean, but college teams are used to dealing with turnover every single year. They deal with a level of turnover every single year. So not totally unique to the college game on this, but if this is your red flags in terms of what, I guess that's the one that's a pushback I would have on the article is red flags in terms of what? Are you red flags in terms of the Gators being SEC contenders? Sure. But red flags in terms of this team being able to win 8-9 games? I mean, yeah, that's sure. But I don't think that's it's going to hold us back from achieving that 8 to 10 win season there, Will.
No, I mean, I think so. Hold on. Let me find it real quick because I have a big database for the transfer portal. So if you look at it, USC this year goes from Clay Helton to Lincoln Riley. They had 25 players who left in the transfer portal. Washington State for Nick Rolovich to Jake Dickert has 26. You look at Florida, Dan Mullen to Billy Napier, they had 12.
Yeah.
Right. So
that's just transfer portal. Correct.
Well, right. So there were some graduations and things like that. But Lincoln Riley's replacing the same type of talent. You always have a large amount of turnover. And I'm also not saying that Napier's going to win 12 games and take them to the playoffs. But I think this idea that Florida was a 6-win team last year by profile is not true. Like Florida was better than that 6-win team, and everything sort of conspired to have them go 6-7. Well, you got to think. So it's not. So I don't look at them as being a baseline 6-win team, and you subtract a bunch of guys, and now they're a 4-win team, and you're going to have to get these great performances to get back up to 6. I look at it and say they were probably an 8 or a 9-win team last year based on talent and based on sort of the overall. If you played the season over again, things would have gone in their favor some of the time rather than it not going in their favor any of the time. And so they probably end up as an 8 or a 9-win team. So you lose 34 guys and okay, well now I'm a 7-win team, but now I've got Anthony Richardson taking over, and now I've got Jack Miller backing him up, and now I've got Ricky Pearsall coming in, and now I got Osiris Torrance at offensive lineman, and now I got Montrell Johnson at running back, and it sort of builds back up into that 7, 8, 9-win team. So it's not a 6-win team that like dropped to 3 because 34 people left. It's a 9-win team that happened to win 6 last year that you're building back up to. So, look, can they go like, would I be surprised if they went 6-6 or 7-5? Nah, I'm not going to be surprised. I think I'd be surprised if they're below 500 considerably. I think I'd be more surprised if they're 6-6 than I would be if they're 10-2. I think 10-2 is realistic. I don't think that happens, but I think it's realistic, and I'd be less surprised at that than I would be at 6-6, because I look at the schedule, and yeah, you got Utah coming in. Yeah, Kentucky's that second game. Can things get off the rails quick? Sure, but there's a world where those games are all at home. And so there's a world where you get off to a really quick start. It's not as though Kentucky is going to be firing on all cylinders when they come in. They lost a bunch of offensive linemen. Who knows about Utah? I mean, yeah, they put up a great fight against Ohio State last year, but Ohio State was missing like half its team that was sitting out that bowl game. So, how good are they? Well, we're going to find out, right? I mean, everybody talks about how Florida never goes outside of the state of Florida for a non-conference game. Well, now Utah's going going all the way across the country for a non-conference game to open up the season in a place that's going to be wild. So, crazier things have happened. So I don't know. It's funny. Like, I think there are legitimate things to look at and go, all right, I'm concerned about the direction of the program, but I actually think they're all tied in with recruiting. I think in terms of the roster and where our expectations and all that sort of stuff, I think Florida is going to be fine this year. And I'm surprised everybody is sitting here going, yeah, there's not a lot of proven talent on the team. Do we want guys who are all that proven back? They weren't that good last year. Like, you want the guys who learned, but you wouldn't want a lot of 6th-year seniors out there playing this year, because then you got no areas to develop.
Yeah, I mean, you want a little more balance. I think you want a little more balance than what we got coming back this year. It's a lot of fresh faces this year. Certainly a lot of reason for optimism too. I think, just because you have concerns about Richardson not working out and potentially getting injured, Matt Hayes, doesn't mean that the man won't work out and stay healthy. So there's a lot that can go right for this team too. Let me say something about this roster too. If they open up with the smackdown over Utah and handle Kentucky at home, which are two distinct possibilities, like, it wouldn't shock me. It's just the weirdest team I can remember in recent history with Florida, because I could easily see it going 2-0. I could see it. I don't think 0-2 is going to happen, but it's not out of the realm of possibility that 0-2 could happen. So it's like the season can go down two different roads very quickly. But if that 2-0 start happens, the nation's going to take notice pretty quickly, I think, with this Gator team, particularly going in. They got USF the following week after Kentucky. That Rocky Top matchup, Tennessee's got all this preseason hype. The Vols fans are fired up. They're believing. Hendon Hooker's got a lot of hype coming into the season. If this team's 3-0 heading into Rocky Top, you're probably looking at a top 15 matchup potentially up in Rocky Top with a lot of national eyeballs on you. So you could change the narrative very quickly in this season by winning just a few games if you're Billy Napier.
Well, and I don't know that you need to, which is the other aspect of this, right? So Nick Saban went 7-6 his first year at Alabama. They lost to Louisiana Monroe. Kirby Smart went 8-5 his first year at Georgia. They lost that horrible game to Tennessee on the dueling Hail Marys. And then didn't they lose to Vanderbilt or something that year too?
I think so. Yeah.
So, look,
in Athens too.
I mean, look, there may be a bad loss this year that we go, ooh, that was brutal. Right. But 7-6, 8-5 doesn't matter, because the whole point is that Napier's coming in and building a process to build the program to where we don't just sit there and go, oh, we went 11-2 this year. Well, 8-4 next year is good enough. It's like, no, the goal is to go 7-6, then 9-4, then 11-2, then playoff, and then, maybe take a step back and then back to the playoff, and then, playoff again, because you only take a step, we only want to take a step back once. The goal is to be a consistent contender for a playoff, and winning this year isn't necessary. This roster will not be what determines Billy Napier's status at Florida. Just like the roster that Mullen took over from Jim McElwain is not what determined his tenure in Gainesville. And if you look at Jim McElwain, the roster he inherited from Will Muschamp is not the thing that determined his tenure. The thing that determines your tenure is that bump class. How does it proceed? You're always going to have a little bit of a dip in your third year, and then you've got this fourth year that comes in. The dip in the third year can't be so bad everybody loses faith in you, and the comeback in year four has to be relying on those guys you brought in that bump class. So if Napier hits on a bunch of guys he's bringing in this 2023 class, Florida's going to be right where we want it to be. Where the actual roster is at this point, other than us enjoying the season and having a good time and being able to gloat when we beat Florida State again and all those sorts of things, is kind of immaterial in the grand scheme of things. It's about, the discipline that we're talking about and the building of the toughness and, taking it seriously that you defend your home field and all those sorts of things are important, and setting that stage is important. I think we'll look back, if Florida ends up back on the top of the mountain 3, 4, 5 years from now, we'll look back and say the buy-in from this team was important to get from point A to point E. But the point is the reason Dan Mullen's gone is you're in point A. And so to sit there and rail about where we are, it's like, yeah, where you been for 3 or 4 years? We've been saying this is the problem. And the problem is that you weren't going to beat Georgia and Alabama on a regular basis. And then when you started losing to Kentucky and South Carolina, well, okay, now it's time to make a change because something's wrong.
I'm with you that this season's not going to define Billy Napier in his time at Florida. However, I think this has been a very grumpy. The mood around the program has been it's been a very grumpy fan base here for a couple of years now, and I say a couple because that 2020 just ended in such a, like, the LSU game, even A&M game was frustrating looking back on it. I mean, for the most part, Kyle Trask threw the ball around the park. Kyle Pitts was unstoppable. Tony put his season together. That was awesome. Historic, great season there for Kadarius Toney too. But the lack of discipline, the defense not showing up, all that stuff by the end of the season, it just left a bad taste in your mouth that carried over into 2021. We've just had this bad mojo going for about a year and a half now. And if Napier can cure that in year one, coming out and beating Utah week 1, a lot of that starts to dissipate, I think. And I think the mood magically starts to, that's why those wins, that's what I think those early wins could buy him, is that grumpy mood that, hey, what were we like in May and June when the recruits weren't landing? Did people start making noise? Yep. That's because that's what the mood of the program is right now. There's been a sour taste in the mouth of Gator fans everywhere for the last couple of years. And it's time, we want to see it turn around. And if you get a couple of those early wins and get people on board, I think that would go a long way to putting to bed this kind of bad streak. We've kind of been on a bad streak here for almost a year and a half, and it would just put that era to bed entirely. And we can look forward with a fresh set of eyes. I feel like this early stretch, that's what it could resolve if you go out and win these games in September.
Yeah. I mean, again, I think I go back to the grumpiness stems from not having a hope. And the question is, where does the hope come from? And, I think some of it is seeing Anthony Richardson excel, obviously. I mean, look, I want Florida to do great, but I don't want people to get their hopes up that this is going to be an 11-win team. I don't think that's realistic. But I think the counter to that is that this roster's trash, which isn't true either, right? And the way that article read is this isn't even really an SEC roster, especially after you get past the first few guys. And you're right, it's not an experienced SEC roster once you get past the first wave, but that's kind of true of go look at LSU. Does LSU have an experienced SEC roster if once you get past its number ones?
Well, and again, like, without being defensive about the criticisms, if the defensive line looks like this 2 years from now, you're going to be the first one to be furious about it, right?
Absolutely, but that's actually where that's the point, right? And this is why I talk about people finding recruiting Jesus when the head coach gets changed, because we've been saying this since 2019. Like, the 2019 class wasn't good enough, and we all knew it. The 2020 class wasn't good enough. We all knew it. The 2021 class wasn't good enough, and we all knew it. And quite honestly, Napier's 2022 class wasn't good enough to compete with Alabama and Georgia. This 2023 class, we'll see. So, he can do a lot of things on the field, but if they go 10-3 and Cormani McClain goes someplace else, the mood's still going to be grumpy, because those are the guys you need to win in 2023, 2024,
That's one of those
2025.
wins. That's one of those wins I'm talking about this fall too.
Yeah, well, so look, I mean, if going 6-0 before you end up heading into the Georgia game or the LSU game or however many games we play before those guys is critical to Cormani McClain committing, then yeah, it's critical to do that. But I don't think that's why he is or isn't going to commit. In fact, I think there's plenty of data that suggests that winning this year doesn't impact this year's class.
That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying in terms of the mood around the program in general, and I think part of the wins. Look, if we're 5-3, if we're 5-3 going into the back half of the season, and we can finish strong, finish up 9-3 or 8-4, and we land McClain and maybe another surprise recruit or two, that's a good 2022 on paper, is it not?
Well, I mean, I guess I'm sitting here going, if so, and this comes from my Moneyball background when I think about baseball, but teams tank all the time, right? The NFL does the same thing. You're terrible in order to get higher draft picks. Now, you don't have to be terrible at Florida or in college football because there isn't a draft order or any of those sorts of things. And certainly you need to maintain enough hope that people are willing to give to build facilities and support NIL and that sort of stuff. But to be honest, in some ways, if the scuttle is that people are hesitant to commit to those sorts of things, whether it's facilities or NIL or anything else, nothing's going to change that faster than a 4-8 year where they sit there and go, wow, we're going to have to pony up. We need to turn this around. As opposed to if you go 10-2, and this was the thing with Mullen, right? Mullen goes 10-3 his first year, 11-2 his second year. And it was really hard for some of us who were sitting there talking about the recruiting to sit there and say, it was like, yeah, this is a really interesting experiment because we know that historically you need better recruiting than he has, but damn, if he isn't winning a lot of games. And so, in some ways, there was this counter between the people who are like, well, he wins, and the people who said, look, he's going to have to recruit better to win all the time. Then he beats Georgia in 2020, and it really did feel like he was starting to prove that experiment was correct. And then all of a sudden, he held out Kyle Pitts, and we have the shoe toss and the Alabama timeouts and the whatever that was against Oklahoma, and the whole thing falls apart. Well, the whole thing falls apart because you have to build your castle on the rock. You can't build it on the sand. And so what I guess my point is that Florida fans shouldn't be upset, irrespective of what the record is this year, if the foundation of the program is being built on rock. Now, if the foundation of the program is being built on sand and he goes 4-8, well, then you got big problems. Right. But then you're like Florida State or Tennessee or those sorts of things. Like we made fun of the brick by brick with Butch Jones, but geez, that guy actually wasn't so bad when you look at what's happened since then up at Rocky Top. And you do need to build that foundation. So look, I get it. I want Florida to win. I want Florida to have a great year. I want it to be a lot of fun. And I want Napier I don't want people to criticize him for anything on the field. What I'm saying is the on-field results this year, maybe it makes the mood a little bit different, but at the end of the day, I don't think that's critical to the long-term success and health of the program. And so just keep that in mind, right? If you're a fan and we lose a close game and there's something that gets screwed up by a player or gets screwed up by Napier or by an assistant, I think what you do is you look and see what the response is, right? If there's a shoe toss, what happens to the guy who throws the shoe is more important than the fact that the shoe toss cost you the game. Now, I'm never going to get over that. Like I will never in my entire life forget that. That moment is seared in my mind. But the reason it's seared in my mind is that the discipline of the program had been allowed to fester to a place where in a critical moment that happened. And we immediately knew that was a Mullen problem because he stayed on the field. Right. And so those are the things I think we need to be looking for. Yes, wins and losses are great, or wins are great, right? We would much rather have more wins than losses, but I think process is critical here, and you got to look at that. So, whether he goes 0-11 or 0-12 or 12-0, I think no matter what happens this year, that's not a reflection on where the program's going to be. And certainly, I think we all think it's going to be somewhere in between anyway. So, let's just enjoy the ride. Give Napier the benefit of the doubt on the field, and then hold him accountable when it comes to building the structure.
It's going to be a fascinating stretch to watch here, entering a brand new era of Gator football here in 2022. Just a few weeks away from kickoff, Will. Under a month, getting there, getting close. Any final words before we head out tonight?
Let's do it, man. As much as I just talked about how I don't care about the record, oh my God, it'd be so great to get a win with my little 7-year-old there in the stands with me in a wild swamp. And, get him, like, my wife's already warning me that I shouldn't take him to the tailgate because he'll find his way over to a cooler or something that he shouldn't. But I don't know, man. Got to give him the full experience. So we'll see how it goes.
All right. Have a great night, everyone. Thanks for tuning in, and go Gators.
Go Gators.
Thank you for watching this episode of Stand Up and Holler. Be sure to subscribe to the Read and Reaction YouTube channel. Join our Patreon community at Read and Reaction for bonus content each week. And check out our website at readandreaction.com. I'm Nick Knudsen, joined by Will Miles. And as always, go Gators.